Chapter 7. Leo. "Who is Aunt Rosa?" Hazel asked. Leo didn't want to talk about her. Nemesis's words were still buzzing in his ears. His tool belt seemed heavier since he'd put the cookie in there, which was impossible. Its pockets could carry anything without adding extra weight. Even the most fragile things would never break. Still, Leo imagined he could feel it in there, dragging him down, waiting to be cracked open. "Long story," he said. "She abandoned me after my mum died. Gave me to foster care." "I'm sorry." "Yeah, well." Leo was anxious to change the subject. "What about you? What Nemesis said about your brother?" Hazel blinked like she got salt in her eyes. "Nico. He found me in the underworld. He brought me back to the mortal world and convinced the Romans at Camp Jupiter to accept me. I owe him for my second chance at life. If Nemesis is right and Nico's in danger, I have to help him." "Sure," Leo said, though the idea made him uneasy. He doubted the revenge goddess ever gave advice out of the goodness of her heart. "And what Nemesis said about your brother having 6 days to live and Rome getting destroyed, any idea what she meant?" "None," Hazel admitted, "but I'm afraid." Whatever she was thinking, she decided not to share it. She climbed one of the largest boulders to get a better view. Leo tried to follow and lost his balance. Hazel caught his hand. She pulled him up and they found themselves atop the rock, holding hands face to face. Hazel's eyes glittered like gold. "Gold is easy," she'd said. It didn't seem that way to Leo, not when he looked at her. He wondered who Sammy was. Leo had a nagging suspicion that he should know, but he just couldn't place the name. Whoever he was lucky if Hazel cared for him. Thanks." He let go of her hand, but they were still standing so close that he could feel the warmth of her breath. She definitely seemed, like a dead person. "When we were talking to Nemesis," Hazel said uneasily, "your hands. I saw flames." "Yeah," he said. "It's a Hephaestus power. Usually I can keep it under control." "Oh." She put one hand protectively on her denim shirt, like she was about to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Leo got the feeling she wanted to back away from him, but the boulder was too small. "Great," he thought, "another person who thinks I'm a scary freak." He gazed across the island. The opposite shore was only a few hundred yards away. Between here and there were dunes and clumps of boulders, but nothing that looked like a reflecting pool. "You will always be the outsider," Nemesis had told him. "The seventh wheel. You will not find a place among your brethren." She might as well have poured acid in his ears. Leo didn't need anybody to tell him he was the odd man out. He'd spent months alone in Bunker 9 at Camp Half-Blood, working on his ship, while his friends trained together and shared meals and played capture the flag for fun and prizes. Even his two best friends, Piper and Jason, often treated him like an outsider. Since they'd started dating, their idea of quality time didn't include Leo. His only other friend, Festus the Dragon, had been reduced to a figurehead when his control disk had got destroyed on their last adventure. Leo didn't have the technical skill to repair it. The seventh wheel. Leo had heard of a fifth wheel, an extra useless piece of equipment. He figured a seventh wheel was worse. He'd thought maybe this quest would be a fresh start for him. All his hard work on the Argo 2 would pay off. He'd have 6 good friends who would admire and appreciate him, and they'd go sailing off into the sunrise to fight giants. Maybe Leo secretly hoped he'd even find a girlfriend. Do the maths, he chided himself. Nemesis was right. He might be part of a group of 7, but he was still isolated. He had fired on the Romans and brought his friends nothing but trouble. "You will not find a place among your brethren." "Leo," Hazel asked gently, "you can't take what Nemesis said to heart." He frowned. "What if it's true?" "She's the goddess of revenge," Hazel reminded him. "Maybe she's on our side, maybe not, but she exists to stir up resentment." Leo wished he could dismiss his feelings that easily. He couldn't. Still, it wasn't Hazel's fault. "We should keep going," he said. "I wonder what Nemesis meant about finishing before dark." Hazel glanced at the sun, which was just touching the horizon. "And who is the cursed boy she mentioned?" Below them a voice said, "Cursed boy she mentioned." At first, Leo saw no one. Then his eyes adjusted. He realized a young woman was standing only 10 feet from the base of the boulder. Her dress was a Greek-style tunic, the same colour as the rocks. Her wispy hair was somewhere between brown and blonde and grey, so it blended with the dry grass. She wasn't invisible, exactly, but she was almost perfectly camouflaged until she moved. Even then, Leo had trouble focusing on her. Her face was pretty but not memorable. In fact, each time Leo blinked, he couldn't remember what she looked like, and he had to concentrate to find her again. "Hello," Hazel said. "Who are you?" "Who are you?" the girl answered. Her voice sounded weary, like she was tired of answering that question. Hazel and Leo exchanged looks. With this demigod gig, you never knew what you'd run into. 9 times out of 10 it wasn't good. A ninja girl camouflaged in earth tones didn't strike Leo as something he wanted to deal with just then. Are you the cursed kid Nemesis mentioned? Leo asked. But you're a girl. You're a girl, said the girl. Excuse me? Leo said. Excuse me? The girl said miserably. You're repeating. Leo stopped. Oh, hold it. Hazel, wasn't there some myth about a girl who repeated everything? Echo, Hazel said. Echo, the girl agreed. She shifted, her dress changing with the landscape. Her eyes were the colour of the salt water. Leo tried to home in on her features, but he couldn't. I don't remember the myth, he admitted. You were cursed to repeat the last thing you heard. You heard, Echo said. Poor thing, Hazel said. If I remember right, a goddess did this. A goddess did this, Echo confirmed. Leo scratched his head. But wasn't that thousands of years? Oh, you're one of the mortals who came back through the doors of death. I really wish we could stop running into dead people. Dead people, Echo said, like she was chastising him. He realised Hazel was staring at her feet. Sorry, he muttered. I didn't mean it that way. That way. Echo pointed towards the far shore of the island. You want to show us something? Hazel asked. She climbed down the boulder and Leo followed. Even up close, Echo was hard to see. In fact, she seemed to get more invisible the longer he looked at her. You're sure you're real? He asked. I mean, flesh and blood. Flesh and blood. She touched Leo's face and made him flinch. Her fingers were warm. So, you have to repeat everything? He asked. Everything. Leo couldn't help smiling. That could be fun. Fun, she said unhappily. Blue elephants. Blue elephants. Kiss me, you fool. You fool. Hey, hey! Leo, Hazel pleaded. Don't tease her. Don't tease her, Echo agreed. Okay, Leo said, though he had to resist the urge. It wasn't every day he met somebody with a built-in talkback feature. So, what were you pointing at? Do you need our help? Help, Echo agreed empathetically. She gestured for them to follow and sprinted down the slope. Leo could only follow her progress by the movement of the grass and the shimmer of her dress as it changed to match the rocks. We better hurry, Hazel said, or we'll lose her. They found the problem. If you can call a mob of good-looking girls a problem, Echo led them down into a grassy meadow shaped like a blast crater with a small pond in the middle. Gathered in the water's edge were several dozen nymphs. At least Leo guessed they were nymphs, like the ones at Camp Half-Blood. These wore gossamer dresses. Their feet were bare. They had elfish features, and their skin had a slightly greenish tinge. Leo didn't understand what they were doing, but they were all crowded together in one spot, facing the pond and jostling for a better view. Several held up phone cameras, trying to get a shot over the heads of the others. Leo had never seen nymphs with phones. He wondered if they were looking at a dead body. If so, why were they bouncing up and down and giggling so excitedly? What are they looking at? Leo wondered. Looking at? Echo sighed. One way to find out. Hazel marched forward and began nudging her way through the crowd. Excuse us, pardon me. Hey, one nymph complained. We were here first. Yeah, another sniffed. He won't be interested in you. The second nymph had large red hearts painted on her cheeks. Over her dress, she wore a t-shirt that read OMG. Demigod business, Leo said, trying to sound official. Make room, thanks. The nymphs grumbled, but they parted to reveal a young man kneeling at the edge of the pond, gazing intently at the water. Leo usually didn't pay much attention to how other guys looked. He supposed that came from hanging around Jason, tall, blonde, rugged, and basically everything Leo could never be. Leo was used to not being noticed by girls. At least, he knew he'd never get a girl by his looks. He hoped his personality and sense of humour would do that someday, though it definitely hadn't worked yet. At any rate, Leo couldn't miss the fact that the guy at the pond was a super good-looking dude. He had a chiselled face with lips and eyes that were somewhere between feminine beautiful and masculine handsome. Dark hair swept over his brow. He might have been 17 or 20. It was hard to say. But he was built like a dancer, with long graceful arms and muscular legs, perfect posture and an air of regal calm. He wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans, with a bow and quiver strapped to his back. The weapons obviously hadn't been used in a while. The arrows were covered in dust. A spider had woven a web in the top of the bow. As Leo edged closer, he realised the guy's face was unusually golden. In the sunset, the light was bouncing off a large flat sheet of celestial bronze that lay at the bottom of the pond, washing Mr. Handsome's features in a warm glow. The guy seemed fascinated with his reflection in the metal. Hazel inhaled sharply. He's gorgeous. Around her, the nymphs squealed and clapped in agreement. I am. The young man murmured dreamily, his gaze still fixed on the water. I am so gorgeous. One of the nymphs showed her iPhone screen. His latest YouTube video got 1 million hits in like an hour. I think I was half of those. The other nymphs giggled. YouTube video? Leo asked. What does he do in the video? Sing? No, silly, the nymph chided. He used to be a prince and a wonderful hunter and stuff, but that doesn't matter. Now he just... Well, look. She showed Leo the video. It was exactly what they were seeing in real life, the guy staring at himself in the pond. He is so hot, said another girl. Her t-shirt read, Mrs. Narcissus. Narcissus? Leo asked. Narcissus, Echo agreed sadly. Leo had forgotten Echo was there. Apparently none of the nymphs had noticed her either. Oh, not you again, Mrs. Narcissus tried to push Echo away, but she misjudged where the camouflaged girl was and ended up shoving several other nymphs. You had your chance, Echo, said the nymph with the iPhone. He dumped you 4,000 years ago. You are so not good enough for him. For him, Echo said bitterly. Wait, Hazel clearly had trouble tearing her eyes away from the handsome guy, but she managed it. What's going on here? Why did Echo bring us here? One nymph rolled her eyes. She was holding an autograph pen and a crumpled poster of Narcissus. Echo was a nymph like us, a long time ago, but she was a total chatterbox, gossiping blah 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 all the time. I know, another nymph shrieked. Like, who could stand that? Just the other day, I told Cleopatra, you know, she lives in the boulder next to me. I said, stop gossiping or you'll end up like Echo. Cleopatra is such a big mouth. Did you hear what she said about the cloud nymph and the satyr? Totally, said the nymph with the poster. So anyway, as punishment for blabbing, Hera cursed Echo so she could only repeat things, which was fine with us. But then Echo fell in love with our gorgeous guy, Narcissus, as if he would ever notice her. As if, said half a dozen others. Now she's got some weird idea he needs saving, said Mrs. Narcissus. She should just go away. Go away, Echo growled back. I'm so glad Narcissus is alive again, said another nymph in a grey dress. She had the words Narcissus plus Lyra written up and down her arms in black marker. He's like the best, and he's in my territory? Oh, stop it, Leia, her friend said. I'm the pond nymph. You're just a rock nymph. Well, I'm the grass nymph, another protested. No, he obviously came here because he likes the wild flowers, another said. Those are mine. The whole mob began arguing while Narcissus stared at the lake, ignoring them. Hold it, Leo yelled. Ladies, hold it! I need to ask Narcissus something. Slowly the nymphs settled down and went back to taking pictures. Leo knelt next to the handsome dude. So, Narcissus, what's up? Could you move? Narcissus asked distractedly. You're ruining the view. Leo looked in the water. His own reflection rippled next to Narcissus's on the surface of the submerged bronze. Leo didn't have any desire to stare at himself. Compared to Narcissus, he looked like an undergrown troll, but there was no doubt the metal was a sheet of hammered celestial bronze, roughly circular, about 5 feet in diameter. What it was doing in the pond, Leo wasn't sure. Celestial bronze fell to earth in odd places. He'd heard that most pieces were cast off from his dad's various workshops. Hephaestus would lose his temper when projects didn't work out, and he'd toss his scraps into the mortal world. This piece looked like it might have been meant as a shield for a god, but it hadn't turned out properly. If Leo could get it back to the ship, it would be just enough bronze for his repairs. Right, great view, Leo said. Happy to move, but if you're not using it, could I just take that sheet of bronze? No, Narcissus said. I love him. He's so gorgeous. Leo looked around to see if the nymphs were laughing. This had to be a huge joke, but they were swooning and nodding in agreement. Only Hazel seemed appalled. She wrinkled her nose as if she'd come to the conclusion that Narcissus smelled worse than he looked. Man, Leo said to Narcissus, you do realise that you're looking at yourself in the water, right? I am so great, Narcissus sighed. He stretched out a hand longingly to touch the water, but held back. No, I can't make ripples. That ruins the image. Wow, I am so great. Yeah, Leo muttered, but if I took the bronze, you could still see yourself in the water. Or here, he reached in his tool belt and pulled out a simple mirror the size of a monocle. I'll trade you. Narcissus took the mirror reluctantly and admired himself. Even you carry a picture of me. I don't blame you. I am gorgeous. Thank you. He set the mirror down and returned his attention to the pond. But I already have a much better image. The colour flatters me, don't you think? Oh, gods, yes, a nymph screamed. Marry me, Narcissus. No, me, another cried. Would you sign my poster? No, sign my shirt. No, sign my forehead. No, sign my... Stop it, Hazel snapped. Stop it, Echo agreed. Leo had lost sight of Echo again, but now he realised she was kneeling on the other side of Narcissus, waving her hand in front of his face, as if trying to break his concentration. Narcissus didn't even blink. The nymph fan club tried to shove Hazel out of the way, but she drew her cavalry sword and forced them back. "Snap out of it," she yelled. "He won't sign your sword," the poster nymph complained. "He won't marry you," said the iPhone girl, "and you can't take his bronze mirror. That's what keeps him there." "You're all ridiculous," Hazel said. "He's so full of himself. How can you possibly like him?" "Like him," Echo sighed, still waving her hand in front of his face. The others sighed along with her. "I am so hot," Narcissus said sympathetically. "Narcissus, listen." Hazel kept her sword at the ready. "Echo brought us here to help you. Didn't you, Echo?" "Echo," said Echo. "Who?" Narcissus said. "The only girl who cares what happens to you, apparently," Hazel said. "Do you remember dying?" Narcissus frowned. No, that can't be right. I am much too important to die." "You died staring at yourself," Hazel insisted. "I remember the story now. Nemesis was the goddess who cursed you because you broke so many hearts. Your punishment was to fall in love with your own reflection." "I love me so much," Narcissus agreed. "You finally died," Hazel continued. "I don't know which version of the story is true. You either drowned yourself or turned into a flower hanging over the water, or... Echo, which is it?" "Which is it?" she said hopelessly. Leo stood. "It doesn't matter. The point is you're alive again, man. You have a second chance. That's what Nemesis was telling us. You can get up and get on with your life. Echo is trying to save you. Or you can stay here and stare at yourself until you die again." "Stay here," all the nymphs screamed. "Marry me before you die," another squeaked. Narcissus shook his head. "You just want my reflection. I don't blame you, but you can't have it. I belong to me." Hazel sighed in exasperation. She glanced at the sun, which was sinking fast. Then she gestured with her sword towards the edge of the crater. "Leo, could we talk for a minute?" "Excuse us," Leo told Narcissus. "Echo, want to come with?" "Come with," Echo confirmed. The nymphs clustered around Narcissus again and began recording new videos and taking more photos. Hazel led the way until they were out of earshot. "Nemesis was right," she said. "Some demigods can't change their nature. Narcissus is going to stay there until he dies again." "No," Leo said. "No," Echo agreed. "We need that bronze," Leo said. "If we take it away, it might give Narcissus a reason to snap out of it. Echo could have a chance to save him." "A chance to save him," Echo said gratefully. Hazel stabbed her sword in the sand. "It could also make several dozen nymphs very angry with us," she said, "and Narcissus might still know how to shoot his bow." Leo pondered that. The sun was just about down. Nemesis had mentioned that Narcissus got agitated after dark, probably because he couldn't see his reflection anymore. Leo didn't want to stick around long enough to find out what the goddess meant by agitated. He'd also had experience with mobs of crazed nymphs. He wasn't anxious to repeat that. "Hazel," he said, "your power with precious metal. Can you just detect it, or can you actually summon it to you?" She frowned. "Sometimes I can summon it. I've never tried with a piece of celestial bronze that big before. I might be able to draw it to me through the earth, but I'd have to be fairly close. It would take a lot of concentration, and it wouldn't be fast." "Be fast," Echo warned. Leo cursed. He had hoped they could just go back to the ship, and Hazel could teleport the celestial bronze from a safe distance. "All right," he said. "We'll have to try something risky. Hazel, how about you try to summon the bronze from right here? Make it sink through the sand, tunnel over to you, and then grab it and run for the ship." "But Narcissus is looking at it all the time," she said. "All the time," Echo echoed. "That'll be my job," Leo said, hating his own plan already. "Echo and I will cause a distraction." "Distraction?" Echo asked. "I'll explain," Leo promised. "Are you willing?" "Willing," Echo said. "Great," Leo said. "Now, let's hope we don't die." Chapter 8. Leo. Leo psyched himself up for an extreme makeover. He summoned some breath mints and a pair of welding goggles from his tool belt. The goggles weren't exactly sunglasses, but they'd have to do. He rolled up the sleeves of his shirt. He used some machine oil to grease back his hair. He stuck a wench in his back pocket. Why exactly he wasn't sure. And he had Hazel draw a tattoo on his biceps with a marker. Hot stuff, with a skull and crossbones. "What in the world are you thinking?" She sounded pretty flustered. "I try not to think," Leo admitted. "It interferes with being nuts. Just concentrate on moving that celestial bronze. Echo, you ready?" "Ready," she said. Leo took a deep breath. He strutted back towards the pond, hoping he looked awesome and not like he had some sort of nervous affliction. "Leo is the coolest," he shouted. "Leo is the coolest," Echo shouted back. Yeah, baby, check me out. Check me out, Echo said. Make way for the king. The king. Narcissus is weak. Weak. The crowd of nymphs scattered in surprise. Leo shooed them away, as if they were bothering him. No autographs, girls. I know you want some Leo time, but I'm way too cool. You better just hang around that ugly dweeb Narcissus. He's lame. Lame, Echo said with enthusiasm. The nymphs muttered angrily. What are you talking about? One demanded. You're lame, said another. Leo adjusted his goggles and smiled. He flexed his biceps, though he didn't have much to flex, and showed off his hot stuffed tattoo. He had the nymphs' attention, if only because they were stunned, but Narcissus was still fixed on his own reflection. You know how ugly Narcissus is? Leo asked the crowd. He's so ugly that when he was born, his mama thought he was a backwoods centaur with a horse butt for a face. Some of the nymphs gasped. Narcissus frowned, as though he was vaguely aware of a gnat buzzing around his head. You know why? His bow has cobwebs, Leo continued. He used to hunt for dates, but he can't find one. One of the nymphs laughed. The others quickly elbowed her into silence. Narcissus turned and scowled at Leo. Who are you? I'm the supersized McShizzle man, Leo said. I'm Leo Valdez, bad boy supreme, and the ladies love a bad boy. Love a bad boy, Echo said with a convincing squeal. Leo took out a pen and autographed the arm of one of the nymphs. Narcissus is a loser. He's so weak he can't bench press a Kleenex. He's so lame, when you look up lame on Wikipedia, it's got a picture of Narcissus, only the picture's so ugly no one ever checks it out. Narcissus knitted his handsome eyebrows. His face was turning from bronze to salmon pink. For the moment, he'd totally forgotten about the pond, and Leo could see the sheet of bronze sinking into the sand. What are you talking about? Narcissus demanded. I am amazing. Everyone knows this. Amazing at pure suck, Leo said. If I was as suck as you, I'd drown myself. Oh, wait, you already did that. Another nymph giggled, then another. Narcissus growled, which did make him look a little less handsome. Meanwhile, Leo beamed and wiggled his eyebrows over his goggles and spread his hands, gesturing for applause. That's right, he said. Team Leo for the win. Team Leo for the win, Echo shouted. She'd wiggled into the mob of nymphs, and because she was so hard to see, the nymphs apparently thought the voice came from one of their own. Oh my God, I am so awesome, Leo bellowed. So awesome, Echo yelled back. He is funny, a nymph ventured. And cute in a scrawny way, another said. Scrawny? Leo asked. Baby, I invented scrawny. Scrawny is the new sizzling hot, and I got the scrawny. Narcissus, he's such a loser, even the underworld didn't want him. He couldn't get the ghost girls to date him. You, said a nymph. You, Echo agreed. Stop! Narcissus got to his feet. This is not right. This person is obviously not awesome, so he must be... He struggled for the right words. It had probably been a long time since he'd talked about anything other than himself. He must be tricking us. Apparently Narcissus wasn't completely stupid. Realization dawned on his face. He turned back to the pond. The bronze mirror is gone. My reflection. Give me back to me. Team Leo, one of the nymphs squeaked, but the others returned their attention to Narcissus. I'm the beautiful one, Narcissus insisted. He's stolen my mirror. I'm going to leave unless we get back. We need it back. The girls gasped. One pointed. There. Hazel was at the top of the crater, running away as fast as she could while hugging a large sheet of bronze. Get it back, cried a nymph. Probably against her will, Echo muttered, Get it back. Yes. Narcissus unslung his bow and grabbed an arrow from his dusty quiver. The first one who gets that bronze, I will like you almost as much as I like me. I might even kiss you, right after I kiss my reflection. Oh my gods, the nymph screamed. And kill those demigods, Narcissus added, glaring very handsomely at Leo. They are not as cool as me. Leo could run pretty fast when someone was trying to kill him. Sadly, he'd had a lot of practice. He overtook Hazel, which was easy since she was struggling with 50 pounds of celestial bronze. He took one side of the metal plate and glanced back. Narcissus was knocking an arrow, but it was so old and brittle it broke into splinters. Ow! He yelled very attractively. My manicure! Normally nymphs were quick. At least the ones at Camp Half-Blood were, but these were burdened with posters, t-shirts and other Narcissus merchandise. The nymphs also weren't great at working as a team. They kept stumbling over one another, pushing and shoving. Echo made things worse by running among them, tripping and tackling as many as she could. Still, they were closing rapidly. Call Arion, Leo gasped. Already did, Hazel said. They ran for the beach. They made it to the edge of the water and could see the Argo too, but there was no way to get there. It was much too far to swim, even if they hadn't been toting bronze. Leo turned. The mob was coming over the dunes, Narcissus in the lead, holding his bow like a band major's baton. The nymphs had conjured assorted weapons. Some held rocks, some had wooden clubs wreathed in flowers. A few of the water nymphs had squirt guns, which seemed not quite as terrifying, but the look in their eyes was still murderous. "Oh man," Leo muttered, summoning fire in his free hand. "Straight up fighting isn't my thing." "Hold the celestial bronze." Hazel drew her sword. "Get behind me." "Get behind me," Echo repeated. The camouflage girl was racing ahead of the mob now. She stopped in front of Leo and turned, spreading her arms as if she meant to personally shield him. "Echo?" Leo could hardly talk with a lump in his throat. "You're one brave nymph." "Brave nymph?" Her tone made it a question. "I'm proud to have you on Team Leo," he said. "If we survive this, you should forget Narcissus." "Forget Narcissus?" she said uncertainly. "You're way too good for him." The nymphs surrounded them in a semicircle. "Trickery!" Narcissus said. "They don't love me, girls. We all love me, don't we?" "Yes," the girls screamed, except for one confused nymph in a yellow dress who squeaked, "Team Leo!" "Kill them!" Narcissus ordered. The nymphs surged forward, but the sand in front of them exploded. Arion raced out of nowhere, circling the mob so quickly he created a sandstorm, showering the nymphs in white lime, spraying their eyes. "I love this horse," Leo said. The nymphs collapsed, coughing and gagging. Narcissus stumbled around blindly, swinging his bow like he was trying to hit a piñata. Hazel climbed into the saddle, hoisted up the bronze and offered Leo a hand. "We can't leave Echo," Leo said. "Leave Echo," the nymph repeated. She smiled, and for the first time Leo could clearly see her face. She really was pretty. Her eyes were bluer than he'd realised. How had he missed that? "Why?" Leo asked. "You don't think you can still save Narcissus?" "Save Narcissus," she said confidently. And even though it was only an echo, Leo could tell that she meant it. She had been given a second chance at life, and she was determined to use it to save the guy she loved, even if he was a completely hopeless, though very handsome, moron. Leo wanted to protest, but Echo leaned forward and kissed him on the cheek, then pushed him gently away. "Leo, come on," Hazel called. The other nymphs were starting to recover. They wiped the lime out of their eyes, which were now glowing green with anger. Leo looked for Echo again, but she had dissolved into the scenery. "Yeah," he said, his throat dry. "Yeah, okay." He climbed up behind Hazel. Arion took off across the water, the nymphs screaming behind them and Narcissus shouting, "Bring me back! Bring me back!" As Arion raced towards the Argo 2, Leo remembered what Nemesis had said about Echo and Narcissus. Perhaps they'll teach you a lesson. Leo had thought she'd meant Narcissus, but now he wondered if the real lesson was for him. For him was Echo, invisible to his brethren, cursed to love someone who didn't care for her. A seventh wheel. He tried to shake that thought. He clung to the sheet of bronze like a shield. He was determined never to forget Echo's face. She deserved at least one person who saw her and knew how good she was. Leo closed his eyes, but the memory of her smile was already fading. Chapter 9. Piper. Piper didn't want to use the knife, but sitting in Jason's cabin waiting for him to wake up, she felt alone and helpless. Jason's face was so pale he might have been dead. She remembered the awful sound of that brick hitting his forehead, an injury that had happened only because he'd tried to shield her from the Romans. Even with the nectar and ambrosia they'd managed to force-feed him, Piper couldn't be sure he would be okay when he woke up. What if he'd lost his memories again, but this time his memories of her? That would be the cruelest trick the gods had played on her yet, and they'd played some pretty cruel tricks. She heard Gleason Hedge in the room next door, humming a military song, Stars and Stripes Forever, maybe. Since the satellite TV was out, the satyr was probably sitting on his bunk reading back issues of Guns and Ammo magazine. He wasn't a bad chaperone, but he was definitely the most warlike old goat Piper had ever met. Of course, she was grateful to the satyr. He had helped her dad, movie actor Tristan McLean, get back on his feet after being kidnapped by giants the past winter. A few weeks ago, Hedge had asked his girlfriend, Melly, to take charge of the McLean household so he could come along to help with this quest. Coach Hedge had tried to make it sound like returning to Camp Half-Blood had been all his idea, but Piper suspected there was more to it. The last few weeks, whenever Piper called home, her dad and Melly had asked her what was wrong. Maybe something in her voice had tipped them off. Piper couldn't share the visions she'd had. They were too disturbing. Besides, her dad had taken a potion that had erased all of Piper's demigod secrets from his memory. But he could still tell when she was upset, and she was pretty sure her dad had encouraged Coach to look out for her. She shouldn't draw her blade. It would only make her feel worse. Finally, the temptation was too great. She unsheathed Catoptris. It didn't look very special, just a triangular blade with an unadorned hilt, but it had once been owned by Helen of Troy. The dagger's name meant looking-glass. Piper gazed at the bronze blade. At first, she saw only her reflection. Then light rippled across the metal. She saw a crowd of Roman demigods gathered in the forum. The blonde, scarecrow-looking kid, Octavian, was speaking to the mob, shaking his fist. Piper couldn't hear him, but the gist was obvious. We need to kill those Greeks. Raina, the praetor, stood to one side, her face tight with suppressed emotion. Bitterness? Anger? Piper wasn't sure. She'd been prepared to hate Raina, but she couldn't. During the feast in the forum, Piper had admired the way Raina kept her feelings in check. Raina had sized up Piper and Jason's relationship right away. As a daughter of Aphrodite, Piper could tell stuff like that. Yet Raina had stayed polite and in control. She'd put her camp's needs ahead of her emotions. She'd given the Greeks a fair chance. Right up until the Argo II had started destroying her city. She'd almost made Piper feel guilty about being Jason's girlfriend, though that was silly. Jason hadn't ever been Raina's boyfriend. Not really. Maybe Raina wasn't so bad, but it didn't matter now. They'd messed up the chance for peace. Piper's power of persuasion had, for once, done absolutely no good. Her secret fear? Maybe she hadn't tried hard enough. Piper had never wanted to make friends with the Romans. She was too worried about losing Jason to his old life. Maybe unconsciously, she hadn't put the best effort into the charm speak. Now Jason was hurt. The ship had been almost destroyed, and according to her dagger, the crazy teddy bear strangling kid Octavian was whipping the Romans into a war frenzy. The scene in her blade shifted. There was a rapid series of images she'd seen before, but she still didn't understand them. Jason riding into battle on horseback, his eyes gold instead of blue. A woman in an old-fashioned Southern Belle dress, standing in an oceanside park with palm trees. A bull with the face of a bearded man rising out of a river, and two giants in matching yellow togas hoisting a rope on a pulley system, lifting a large bronze vase out of a pit. Then came the worst vision. She saw herself with Jason and Percy, standing waist-deep in water at the bottom of a dark circular chamber, like a giant well. Ghostly shapes moved through the water as it rose rapidly. Piper clawed at the walls, trying to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The water reached their chests. Jason was pulled under. Percy stumbled and disappeared. How could a child of the sea god drown? Piper didn't know, but she watched herself in the vision, alone and thrashing in the dark until the water rose over her head. Piper shut her eyes. "Don't show me that again," she pleaded. "Show me something helpful." She forced herself to look at the blade again. This time she saw an empty highway, cutting between fields of wheat and sunflowers. A mileage marker read, Topeka, 32. On the shoulder of the road stood a man in khaki shorts and a purple camp shirt. His face was lost in the shadow of a broad hat, the brim reefed in leafy vines. He held up a silver goblet and beckoned to Piper. Somehow she knew he was offering her some sort of gift, a cure or an antidote. "Hey," Jason croaked. Piper was so startled she dropped the knife. "You're awake." "Don't sound so surprised." Jason touched his bandaged head and frowned. What happened? I remembered the explosions and... You remember who I am?" Jason tried to laugh, but in turn, it turned into a painful wince. "Last I checked, you were my awesome girlfriend Piper, unless something has changed since I was out." Piper was so relieved she almost sobbed. She helped him sit up and gave him some nectar to sip, while she brought him up to speed. She was just explaining Leo's plan to fix the ship when she heard horse hooves clomping across the deck over their heads. Moments later, Leo and Hazel stumbled to a stop in the doorway, carrying a large sheet of hammered bronze between them. "Gods of Olympus!" Piper stared at Leo. "What happened to you?" His hair was greased back. He had welding goggles on his forehead, a lipstick mark on his cheek, tattoos all over his arms, and a t-shirt that read "Hot Stuff, Bad Boy" and Team Leo. "Long story," he said. "Others back?" "Not yet," Piper said. Leo cursed. Then he noticed Jason sitting up and his face brightened. "Hey man, glad you're better. I'll be in the engine room." He ran off with the sheet of bronze, leaving Hazel in the doorway. Piper raised an eyebrow at her. "Team Leo?" "We met Narcissus," Hazel said, which didn't really explain much. "Also Nemesis, the revenge goddess." Jason sighed. "I miss all the fun." On the deck above, something went thump, as if a heavy creature had landed. Annabeth and Percy came running down the hall. Percy was toting a steaming 5-gallon plastic bucket that smelled horrible. Annabeth had a patch of black sticky stuff in her hair. Percy's shirt was covered in it. "Roofing tar," Piper guessed. Frank stumbled up behind them, which made the hallway pretty jam-packed with demigods. Frank had a big smear of the black smudge and sludge down his face. "Ran into some tar monsters," Annabeth said. Hey Jason, glad you're awake. Hazel, where's Leo? She pointed down. Engine room. Suddenly the entire ship listed to port. The demigod stumbled. Percy almost spilled his bucket of tar. What was that? He demanded. Oh, Hazel looked embarrassed. We may have angered the nymphs who live in this lake. Like, all of them? Great. Percy handed the bucket of tar to Frank and Annabeth. You guys help Leo. I'll hold off the water spirits as long as I can. On it, Frank promised. The three of them ran off, leaving Hazel at the cabin door. The ship listed again, and Hazel hugged her stomach like she was going to be sick. I'll just, She swallowed, pointed weakly down the passageway and ran off. Jason and Piper stayed below as the ship rocked back and forth. For a hero, Piper felt pretty useless. Waves crashed against the hull as angry voices came from above deck. Percy shouting, Coach Hedge yelling at the lake. Festus, the figurehead, breathed fire several times. Down the hall, Hazel moaned miserably in her cabin. In the engine room below, it sounded like Leo and the others were doing an Irish line dance with anvils tied to their feet. After what seemed like hours, the engine began to hum. The oars creaked and groaned, and Piper felt the ship lift into the air. The rocking and shaking stopped. The ship became quiet except for the drone of machinery. Finally, Leo emerged from the engine room. He was caked in sweat, lime dust and tar. His t-shirt looked like it had been caught in an escalator and chewed to shreds. The Team Leo on his chest now read, Am Leo. But he grinned like a madman and announced that they were safely underway. Meeting in the mess hall. 1 hour, he said. Crazy day, huh? After everyone had cleaned up, Coach Hedge took the helm and the demigods gathered below for dinner. It was the first time they'd all sat down together, just the 7 of them. Maybe their presence should have reassured Piper, but seeing all of them in one place only reminded her that the prophecy of 7 was unfolding at last. No more waiting for Leo to finish the ship. No more easy days at Camp Half-Blood, pretending the future was still a long way off. They were underway, with a bunch of angry Romans behind them and the ancient lands ahead. The giants would be waiting. Gaia was rising, and unless they succeeded in this quest, the world would be destroyed. The others must have felt it too. The tension in the mess hall was like an electrical storm brewing, which was totally possible, considering Percy's and Jason's powers. In an awkward moment, the 2 boys tried to sit in the same chair at the head of the table. Sparks literally flew from Jason's hands. After a brief silent standoff, like they were both thinking, seriously, dude, they ceded the chair to Annabeth and sat at opposite sides of the table. The crew compared notes on what had happened in Salt Lake City, but even Leo's ridiculous story about how he tricked Narcissus wasn't enough to cheer up the group. So, where to now? Leo asked with a mouthful of pizza. I did a quick repair job to get us out of the lake, but there's still a lot of damage. We should really put down again and fix things before we head across the Atlantic. Percy was eating a piece of pie, which for some reason was completely blue. Filling, crust, even the whipped cream. We need to put some distance between us and Camp Jupiter, he said. Frank spotted some eagles over Salt Lake City. We figure the Romans aren't far behind us. That didn't improve the mood around the table. Piper didn't want to say anything, but she felt obliged, and a little guilty. I don't suppose we should go back and try to reason with the Romans. Maybe I didn't try hard enough with the charm speak. Jason took her hand. It wasn't your fault, Pipes. Or Leo's, he added quickly. Whatever happened, it was Gaia's doing, to drive the 2 camps apart. Piper was grateful for his support, but she still felt uneasy. Maybe, if we could explain that, though. With no proof, Annabeth asked, and no idea what really happened. I appreciate what you're saying, Piper. I don't want the Romans on our bad side, but until we understand what Gaia's up to, going back is suicide. She's right, Hazel said. She still looked a little queasy from seasickness, but she was trying to eat a few saltine crackers. The rim of her plate was embedded with rubies, and Piper was pretty sure they hadn't been there at the beginning of the meal. Rayna might listen, but Octavian won't. The Romans have honour to think about. They've been attacked. They'll shoot first and ask questions post-hack. Piper stared at her own dinner. The magical plates could conjure up a great selection of vegetarian stuff. She especially liked the avocado and grilled pepper quesadilla, but tonight she didn't have much of an appetite. She thought about the visions she'd seen in her knife. Jason with golden eyes, the bull with the human head, the 2 giants in yellow togas hoisting a bronze jar from a pit. Worst of all, she remembered herself drowning in black water. Piper had always liked the water. She had good memories of surfing with her dad. But since she'd started seeing that vision in Catoptris, she'd been thinking more and more of her old Cherokee story her granddad used to tell her to keep away from the river near his cabin. He told her the Cherokees believed in good water spirits, like the Naiads of the Greeks. But they also believed in evil water spirits, the water cannibals, who hunted mortals with invisible arrows and were especially fond of drowning small children. You're right, she decided. We have to keep going. Not just because of the Romans. We have to hurry. Hazel nodded. Nemesis said we only have 6 days until Nico dies, and Rome is destroyed. Jason frowned. You mean Rome? Not New Rome? I think, Hazel said. But if so, that's not much time. Why 6 days? Percy wondered. How are they going to destroy Rome? No one answered. Piper didn't want to add further bad news, but she felt she had to. There's more, she said. I've been seeing some things in my knife. The big kid, Frank, froze with a forkful of spaghetti halfway to his mouth. Things such as... They don't really make sense, Piper said. Just garbled images. But I saw 2 giants dressed alike. Maybe twins? Annabeth stared at the magical video feed from Camp Half-Blood on the wall. Right now it showed the living room in the big house, a cosy fire on the hearth, and Seymour, the stuffed leopard head, snoring contentedly above the mantel. Twins, like in Ella's prophecy, Annabeth said. If we could figure out those lines, it might help. Wisdom's daughter walks alone, Percy said. The mark of Athena burns through Rome. Annabeth, that's got to mean you. Juno told me, well, she said you had a hard task ahead of you in Rome. She said she doubted you could do it, but I know she's wrong. Annabeth took a long breath. Raina was about to tell me something right before the ship fired on us. She said there was an old legend among the Roman praetors, something that had to do with Athena. She said it might be the reason Greeks and Romans could never get along. Leo and Hazel exchanged nervous looks. Nemesis mentioned something similar, Leo said. She talked about an old score that had to be settled. The one thing that might bring the gods' 2 natures into harmony, Hazel recalled. An old wrong finally avenged. Percy drew a frowny face in his blue whipped cream. I was only a praetor for about 2 hours. Jason, you ever hear a legend like that? Jason was still holding Piper's hand. His fingers had turned clammy. I'm not sure, he said. I'll give it some thought. Percy narrowed his eyes. You're not sure? Jason didn't respond. Piper wanted to ask him what was wrong. She could tell he didn't want to discuss this old legend. She caught his eye, and he pleaded silently, later. Hazel broke the silence. What about the other lines? She turned her ruby-encrusted plate. Twins snuff out the angel's breath. Who holds the key to endless death? Giant's bane stands golden pale, Frank added. Won through pain from a woven jail. Giant's bane, Leo said. Anything that's a giant's bane is good for us, right? That's probably what we need to find. If it can help the gods get their schizophrenic act together, that's good. Percy nodded. We can't kill the giants without the help of the gods. Jason turned to Frank and Hazel. I thought you guys killed that one giant in Alaska without God's help, just the 2 of you. Ausonius was a special case, Frank said. He was only immortal in the territory where he was reborn, Alaska, but not in Canada. I wish I could kill all the giants by dragging them across the border from Alaska into Canada, but, he shrugged. Percy's right. We'll need the gods. Piper gazed at the walls. She really wished Leo hadn't enchanted them with images of Camp Half-Blood. It was like a doorway to home that she could never go through. She watched the hearth of Hestia burning in the middle of the green as the cabins turned off their lights for curfew. She wondered how the Roman demigods Frank and Hazel felt about those images. They'd never ever been to Camp Half-Blood. Did it seem alien to them, or unfair that Camp Jupiter wasn't represented? Did it make them miss their own home? The other lines of the prophecy turned in Piper's mind. What was a woven jail? How could twins snuff out an angel's breath? The key to endless death didn't sound very cheerful either. So, Leo pushed his chair away from the table. First things first, I guess. We'll have to put down in the morning to finish repairs. Someplace close to a city, Annabeth suggested, in case we need supplies. But somewhere out of the way, so the Romans will have trouble finding us. Any ideas? No one spoke. Piper remembered her vision in the knife. The strange man in purple, holding out a goblet and beckoning to her. He'd been standing in front of a sign that read, Topeka 32. Well, she ventured, how do you guys feel about Kansas? Chapter 10. Piper. Piper had trouble falling asleep. Coach Hedge spent the first hour after curfew doing his nightly duty, walking up and down the passageway yelling, Lights out, settle down, try to sneak out and I'll smack you back to Long Island. He banged his baseball bat against a cabin door whenever he heard a noise, shouting at everyone to go to sleep, which made it impossible for anyone to go to sleep. Piper figured this was the most fun the satyr had had since he pretended to be a gym teacher at the wilderness school. She stared at the bronze beams on the ceiling. Her cabin was pretty cosy. Leo had programmed their quarters to adjust automatically to the occupants' preferred temperature, so it was never too cold or too hot. The mattress and the pillows were stuffed with Pegasus down. No Pegasi were harmed in the making of these products, Leo had assured her, so they were uber comfortable. A bronze lantern hung from the ceiling, glowing at whatever brightness Piper wished. The lantern's sides were perforated with pinholes, so at night glimmering constellations drifted across her walls. Piper had so many things on her mind, she thought she'd never sleep, but there was something peaceful about the rocking of the boat and the drone of the aerial oars as they scooped through the sky. Finally, her eyelids got heavy, and she drifted off. It seemed like only a few seconds had passed before she woke to the breakfast bell. "Yo, Piper!" Leo knocked on her door. "We're landing!" Landing? She sat up groggily. Leo opened her door and poked his head in. He had his hand over his eyes, which would have been a nice gesture if he hadn't been peeking through his fingers. "You decent?" "Leo?" "Sorry," he grinned. "Hey, nice Power Ranger jammies." "They are not Power Rangers, they're Cherokee Eagles." "Yeah, sure. Anyway, we're setting down a few miles outside Topeka, as requested. And, he glanced out at the passageway and then leaned inside again. "Thanks for not hating me, for blowing up the Romans yesterday." Piper rubbed his eyes. The feast in New Rome had been only yesterday? "That's okay, Leo. You weren't in control of yourself." "Yeah, but still, you didn't have to stick up for me." "Are you kidding? You're like an annoying little brother I never had. Of course I'll stick up for you." Thanks?" From above, Coach Hedge yelled, "Far she blows! Kansas ahoy!" "Holy for Hephaestus," Leo muttered. "He really needs to work on his ship speak. I'd better get above deck." By the time Piper had showered, changed and grabbed a bagel from the mess hall, she could hear the ship's landing gear extending. She climbed on deck and joined the others as the Argo II settled in the middle of a field of sunflowers. The oars retracted. The gangplank lowered itself. The morning air smelled of irrigation, warm plants and fertilized earth. Not a bad smell. It reminded Piper of Grandpa Tom's place in Talcott, Oklahoma, back on the reservation. Percy was the first to notice her. He smiled in greeting, which for some reason surprised Piper. He was wearing faded jeans and a fresh orange Camp Half-Blood t-shirt, as if he'd never been away from the Greek side. The new clothes had probably helped his mood, and of course the fact that he was standing at the rail with his arm around Annabeth. Piper was happy to see Annabeth with a sparkle in her eyes, because Piper had never had a better friend. For months, Annabeth had been tormenting herself, her every waking moment consumed with the search for Percy. Now, despite the dangerous quest they were facing, at least she had her boyfriend back. So, Annabeth plucked the bagel out of Piper's hand and took a bite, but that didn't bother Piper. Back at camp, they'd had a running joke about stealing each other's breakfast. Here we are. What's the plan? "I want to check out the highway," Piper said. "Find the sign that says Topeka 32. Leo spun his Wii controller in a circle, and the sails lowered themselves. "We shouldn't be far," he said. "Festus and I calculated the landing as best we could. What do you expect to find at the mile marker?" Piper explained what she'd seen in the knife. The man in purple with a goblet. She kept quiet about the other images, though like the vision of Percy, Jason and herself drowning, she wasn't sure what it meant anyway, and everyone seemed in much better spirits that morning, so she didn't want to ruin the mood. "Purple shirt?" Jason asked. "Vines on his hat? Sounds like Bacchus." "Dionysus," Percy muttered. "If we came all the way to Kansas to see Mr. D." "Bacchus isn't so bad," Jason said. "I don't like his followers much." Piper shuddered. Jason, Leo and she had had an encounter with them Maenads a few months ago, and she had almost got torn to pieces. "But the god himself is okay," Jason continued. "I did him a favour once, up in the wine country." Percy looked appalled. "Whatever, man. Maybe he's better on the Roman side, but why would he be hanging around in Kansas? Didn't Zeus order the gods to cease all contact with mortals?" Frank grunted. The big guy was wearing a blue tracksuit this morning, like he was ready to go for a jog in the sunflowers. "The gods haven't been very good at following that order," he noted. "Besides, if the gods have gone schizophrenic, like Hazel said," "and Leo said," added Leo. Frank scowled at him. "Then who knows what's going on with the Olympians? Could be some pretty bad stuff out there." "Sounds dangerous," Leo agreed cheerfully. "Well, you guys have fun. I've got to finish repairs on the hull. Coach Hedge is going to work on the broken crossbows, and, Annabeth, I could really use your help. You're the only one person who even sort of understands engineering." Annabeth looked apologetically at Percy. "He's right. I should stay and help. I'll come back to you." He kissed her on the cheek. "Promise." They were so easy together it made Piper's heart ache. Jason was great, of course, but sometimes he acted so distant. Like last night, when he'd been reluctant to talk about the old Roman legend. So often he seemed to be thinking of his old life at Camp Jupiter. Piper wondered if she would ever be able to break through that barrier. The trip to Camp Jupiter, seeing Rayner in person, hadn't helped. Neither did the fact that Jason had chosen to wear a purple shirt today, the colour of the Romans. Frank slid his bow off his shoulder and propped it against the rail. I think I should turn into a crow or something and fly around. Keep an eye out for Roman eagles." "Why a crow?" Leo asked. "Man, if you can turn into a dragon, why don't you just turn into a dragon every time? That's the coolest." Frank's face looked like it was being infused with cranberry juice. "That's like asking why you don't bench press your maximum weight every time you lift. Because it's hard, and you'd hurt yourself. Turning into a dragon isn't easy." "Oh," Leo nodded. "I wouldn't know. I don't lift weights." "Yeah, well, maybe you should consider it, Mr. Hazel stepped between them. "I'll help you, Frank," she said, shooting Leo an evil look. "I can summon Arion and scout around below." "Sure," Frank said, still glaring at Leo. "Yeah, thanks." Piper wondered what was going on with those three. The boys showing off for Hazel and razzing each other. That she understood. But it almost seemed like Hazel and Leo had a history. As far as she knew, they'd met for the first time just yesterday. She wondered if something else had happened on their trip to Great Salt Lake. Something they hadn't mentioned. Hazel turned to Percy. "Just be careful when you go out there. Lots of fields, lots of crops. Could be carpoi on the loose." "Carpoi?" Piper asked. Grain spirits," Hazel said. "You don't want to meet them." Piper didn't see how a grain spirit could be so bad, but Hazel's tone convinced her not to ask. "That leaves 3 of us to check on the mile marker," Percy said. "Me, Jason, Piper. I'm not psyched about seeing Mr. D again. That guy is a pain. But Jason, if you're on better terms with him..." "Yeah," Jason said. "If we find him, I'll talk to him. Piper, it's your vision. You should take the lead." Piper shivered. She'd seen the 3 of them drowning in that dark well. Was Kansas where it would happen? That didn't seem right, but she couldn't be sure. "Of course," she said, trying to sound upbeat. "Let's find the highway." Leo had said they were close. His idea of close needed some work. After trudging half a mile through hot fields, getting bitten by mosquitoes and whacked in the face with scratchy sunflowers, they finally reached the road. An old billboard for Bubba's Gas and Grub indicated they were still 40 miles from the first Topeka exit. "Correct my maths," Percy said, "but doesn't that mean we have 8 miles to walk?" Jason peered both ways down the deserted road. He looked better today, thanks to the magical healing of ambrosia and nectar. His colour was back to normal, and the scar on his forehead had almost vanished. The new gladius that Hera had given him last winter hung at his belt. Most guys would look pretty awkward, walking around with a scabbard strapped to their jeans, but on Jason it seemed perfectly natural. "No cars," he said, "but I guess we wouldn't want to hitchhike." "No," Piper agreed, gazing nervously down the highway. "We've already spent too much time going overland. The Earth is Gaia's territory." Jason snapped his fingers. "I can call a friend for a ride." Percy raised his eyebrows. "Oh yeah? Me too. Let's see whose friend gets here first." Jason whistled. Piper knew what he was doing, but he'd succeeded in summoning Tempest only 3 times since they'd met the storm spirit at the Wolf House last winter. Today, the sky was so blue, Piper didn't see how it could work. Percy simply closed his eyes and concentrated. Piper hadn't studied him up close before. After hearing so much at Camp Half-Blood about Percy Jackson, this and Percy Jackson that, she thought he looked, well, unimpressive, especially next to Jason. Percy was more slender, about an inch shorter, with slightly longer, much darker hair. He wasn't really Piper's type, if she'd seen him in the mall somewhere, so she probably would have thought he was a skater, cute in a scruffy way, a little on the wild side, definitely a troublemaker. She would have steered clear. She had enough trouble in her life. But she could see why Annabeth liked him, and she could definitely see why Percy needed Annabeth in his life. If anybody could keep a guy like that under control, it was Annabeth. Thunder crackled in the clear sky. Jason smiled. Soon. Too late. Percy pointed east, where a black-winged shape was spiralling towards them. At first, Piper thought it might be Frank in a crow form, and then she realised it was much too big to be a bird. "A black Pegasus," she said. "Never seen one like that." The winged stallion came in for landing. He trotted over to Percy and nuzzled his face, then turned his head inquisitively towards Piper and Jason. "Blackjack," Percy said. "This is Piper and Jason. They're friends." The horse nickered. Maybe later," Percy answered. Piper had heard that Percy could speak to horses, being the son of the horse lord Poseidon, but she'd never seen it in action. "What does Blackjack want?" she asked. "Donuts," Percy said. "Always donuts. He can carry all 3 of us if..." Suddenly the air turned cold. Piper's ears popped. About 50 yards away, a miniature cyclone, 3 stories tall, tore across the tops of the sunflowers like a scene from The Wizard of Oz. It touched down on the road next to Jason and took the form of a horse, a misty steed with lightning flickering through its body. "Tempest," Jason said, grinning broadly. "Long time, my friend." The storm spirit reared and whinnied. Blackjack backed up skittishly. "Easy, boy," Percy said. "He's a friend too." He gave Jason an impressed look. "Nice ride, Grace." Jason shrugged. "I made friends with him during our fight at the Wolf House. He's a free spirit, literally, but once in a while he agrees to help me. Percy and Jason climbed on their respective horses. Piper had never been comfortable with Tempest. Riding full gallop on a beast that could vaporize at any moment made her a bit nervous. Nevertheless, she accepted Jason's hand and climbed on. Tempest raced down the road with Blackjack soaring overhead. Fortunately, they didn't pass any cars, or they might have caused a wreck. In no time, they arrived at the 32-mile marker, which looked exactly as Piper had seen it in her vision. Blackjack landed. Both horses pawed the tarmac. Neither looked pleased to have stopped so suddenly, just when they'd found their stride. Blackjack whinnied. "You're right," Percy said. "No sign of the wine dude." "I beg your pardon?" said a voice from the fields. Tempest turned so quickly Piper almost fell off. The wheat parted, and the man from her vision stepped into view. He wore a wide-brimmed hat reefed in grapevines, a purple short-sleeved shirt, khaki shorts, and Birkenstocks with white socks. He looked maybe 30, with a slight potbelly, like a frat boy who hadn't yet realised college was over. "Did someone just call me the wine dude?" he asked in a lazy drawl. "It's Bacchus, please, or Mr. Bacchus, or Lord Bacchus, or sometimes, oh my gods, please don't kill me, Lord Bacchus." Percy urged Blackjack forward, though the Pegasus didn't seem happy about it. "You look different," Percy told the god. "Skinnier, your hair is longer, and your shirt isn't so loud." The wine god squinted up at him. "What in blazes are you talking about? Who are you? Where is Keris?" What series?" "I think he means Keris," Jason said, "the goddess of agriculture. You'd call her Demeter?" He nodded respectfully to the god. "Lord Bacchus, do you remember me? I helped you with that missing leopard in Sonoma." Bacchus scratched his stubbly chin. "Ah, yes, John Green." "Jason Grace." "Whatever," the god said. "Did Keris send you then?" "No, Lord Bacchus," Jason said. "Were you expecting to meet her here?" The god snorted. "Well, I didn't come to Kansas to party, my boy. Keris asked me here for a council of war. What with Gaia rising, the crops are withering. Droughts are spreading. The carpoi are in revolt. Even my grapes aren't safe. Keris wanted a united front in the plant war." "The plant war," Percy said. "You're going to arm all the little grapes with tiny assault rifles?" The god narrowed his eyes. "Have we met?" "At Camp Half-Blood," Percy said. "I know you as Mr. Dionysus." "Ah!" Bacchus winced and pressed his hands to his temples. For a moment his image flickered. Piper saw a different person, fatter, chumpier, dumpier, in a much louder leopard-patterned shirt. Then Bacchus returned to being Bacchus. "Stop that," he demanded. "Stop thinking about me in Greek." Percy blinked. But do you have any idea how hard it is to stay focused, splitting headaches all the time? I never know what I'm doing or where I'm going, constantly grumpy." "That sounds pretty normal for you," Percy said. The god's nostrils flared. One of the grape leaves on his hat burst into flame. "If we know each other from that other camp, it's a wonder I haven't already turned you into a dolphin." "It was discussed," Percy assured him. "I think you were just too lazy to do it." Piper had been watching with horrified fascination, the way she might watch a car wreck in progress. Now she realised Percy was not making things better, and Annabeth wasn't around to rein him in. Piper figured her friend would never forgive her if she brought Percy back transformed into a sea mammal. "Lord Bacchus," she interrupted, slipping off Tempest's back. "Piper, careful," Jason said. She shot him a warning glance. "I've got this." "Sorry to trouble you, my lord," she told the god, "but actually we came here to get your advice. Please, we need your wisdom." She used her most agreeable tone, pouring respect into her charm-speak. The god frowned, but the purple glow faded in his eyes. "You're well-spoken, girl. Advice, eh? Very well. I would avoid karaoke. Really, theme parties in general are out, and in these austere times, people are looking for a simple, low-key affair with locally produced organic snacks, and "Not about parties," Piper interrupted. "Although that's incredibly useful advice, Lord Bacchus. We were hoping you'd help us on our quest." She explained about the Argo II and their voyage to stop the giants from the awakening Gaia. She told him what Nemesis had said, that in 6 days Rome would be destroyed. She described the vision reflected in her knife, where Bacchus offered her a silver goblet. Silver goblet? The god didn't sound very excited. He grabbed a Diet Pepsi from nowhere and popped the top of the can. "You didn't drink Diet Coke?" Percy said. "I don't know what you're talking about," Bacchus snapped. "As to this vision of the goblet, young lady, I have nothing for you to drink unless you want a Pepsi. Jupiter has put me under strict orders to avoid giving wine to minors. Bothersome, but there you have it. As for the giants, I know them well. I fought in the first giant war, you know." "You can fight?" Percy asked. Piper wished he hadn't sounded so incredulous. Dionysus snarled. His Diet Pepsi transformed into a 5-foot staff wreathed in ivy topped with a pine cone. "Ephesus," Piper said, hoping to distract the god before he whacked Percy on the head. She'd seen weapons like that before in the hands of crazy nymphs, and wasn't thrilled to see one again, but she tried to sound impressed. Oh, what a mighty weapon! Indeed, Bacchus agreed. I'm glad someone in your group is smart. The pine cone is a fearsome tool of destruction. I was a demigod myself in the first giant war, you know, the son of Jupiter. Jason flinched. Probably he wasn't thrilled to be reminded that the wine dude was technically his big brother. Bacchus swung his staff through the air, though his potbelly almost threw him off balance. Of course, that was long before I invented wine and became an immortal. I fought side by side with the gods and some other demigod, Heracles, I think. Heracles, Piper suggested politely. Whatever, Bacchus said. Anyway, I killed the giant Ephialtes and his brother Otis. Horrible boars, those two. Pine cone in the face for both of them. Piper held her breath. All at once, several ideas came together in her head. The visions in the knife, the lines of the prophecy that they'd been discussing the night before. She felt like she used to when she was scuba diving with her father, and he would wipe her mask for her underwater. Suddenly, everything was clearer. Lord Bacchus, she said, trying to control the nervousness in her voice. Those two giants, Ephialtes and Otis, would they happen to be twins? The god seemed distracted by this, first as swinging, but he nodded. Yes, twins. Yes, yes, that's right. Piper turned to Jason. She could tell he was following her thoughts. Twins snuff out the angel's breath. In the blade of Catoptris, she'd seen two giants in yellow robes lifting a jar from a deep pit. That's why we're here, Piper told the god. You're part of our quest. Bacchus frowned. I'm sorry, my girl, I'm not a demigod anymore. I don't do quests. But giants can only be killed by heroes and gods working together, she insisted. You're a god now, and the two giants we have to fight are Ephialtes and Otis, I think. I think they're waiting for us in Rome. They're going to destroy the city somehow. The silver goblet I saw in my vision. Maybe it's meant as a symbol for your help. You have to help us kill the giants. Bacchus glared at her, and Piper realised she'd chosen her words poorly. My girl, he said coldly, I don't have to do anything. Besides, I only help those who give me proper tribute, which no one has managed to do in many, many centuries. Blackjack whinnied uneasily. Piper couldn't blame him. She didn't like the sound of tribute. She remembered the Maenads, the crazed followers of Bacchus who would tear up non-believers with their bare hands, and that was when they were in a good mood. Percy voiced the question that she was too scared to ask. What kind of tribute? Bacchus waved his hand dismissively. Nothing you would handle, insolent Greek. But I will give you some free advice, since this girl does have some manners. Seek out Gaia's son, Phorcys. He always hated his mother. Not that I can blame him. He didn't have much use for his siblings and the twins, either. You'll find him in the city where they're named after that heroine, Atalanta. Piper hesitated. You mean Atlanta? That's the one. But this Phorcys, Jason said. Is he a giant? A titan? Bacchus laughed. Neither. Seek out the salt water. Salt water, Percy said. In Atlanta? Yes, Bacchus said. Are you hard of hearing? If anyone can give you insight on Gaia and the twins, it's Phorcys. Just watch out for him. What do you mean? Jason asked. The god glanced at the sun, which had climbed almost to high noon. It's unlike Keres to be late, unless she sensed something dangerous in the area. Or, the god's face suddenly went slack. Or a trap. Well, I must be going, and if I were you, I'd do the same. Lord Bacchus. Wait, Jason protested. The god shimmered and disappeared with a sound like a soda can top being popped. The wind rustled through the sunflowers. The horses paced in agitation. Despite the dry, hot day, Piper shivered. A cold feeling. Annabeth and Leo had both described a cold feeling. Bacchus is right, she said. We need to leave. Too late, said a sleepy voice, humming through the fields all around them and resonating in the ground at Piper's feet. Percy and Jason drew their swords. Piper stood on the road between them, frozen with fear. The power of Gaia was suddenly everywhere. The sunflowers turned to look at them. The wheat bent towards them, like a million scythes. Welcome to my party, Gaia murmured. Her voice reminded Piper of corn growing, a crackling, hissing, hot and persistent noise she used to hear at Grandpa Tom's on those quiet nights in Oklahoma. What did Bacchus say? The goddess mocked. A simple, low-key affair with organic snacks? Yes, for my snacks, I need only two. The blood of a female demigod and the blood of a male. Piper, my dear, choose which hero will die with you. Gaia, Jason yelled, stop hiding in the wheat. Show yourself. Such bravado, Gaia hissed. But the other one, Percy Jackson, also has appeal. Choose, Piper McLean, or I will. Piper's heart raced. Gaia meant to kill her. That was no surprise. But what was this about choosing one of the boys? Why would Gaia let either of them go? It had to be a trap. "You're insane," she shouted. "I'm not choosing anything for you." Suddenly, Jason gasped. He sat up straight in his saddle. "Jason," Piper cried. "What's wrong?" He looked down at her, his expression deadly calm. His eyes were no longer blue. They glowed solid gold. "Percy, help!" Piper stumbled back from Tempest. But Percy galloped away from them. He stopped 30 feet down the road and wheeled his Pegasus around. He raised his sword and pointed the tip towards Jason. "One will die," Percy said. But the voice wasn't his. It was deep and hollow, like someone whispering from inside the barrel of a cannon. "I will choose," Jason answered in the same hollow voice. "No," Piper yelled. All around her, the fields crackled and hissed, laughing in Gaia's voice as Percy and Jason charged at each other, their weapons ready. Chapter 11. Piper. If not for the horses, Piper would have died. Jason and Percy charged at each other, but Tempest and Blackjack balked long enough for Piper to leap out of the way. She rolled to the edge of the road and looked back, dazed and horrified, as the boys crossed swords, gold against bronze. Sparks flew, their blades blurred, strike and parry, and the ground trembled. The first exchange took only a second, but Piper couldn't believe the speed of their sword fighting. The horses pulled away from each other, Tempest thundering in protest, Blackjack flapping his wings. "Stop it!" Piper yelled. For a moment, Jason heeded her voice. His golden eyes turned towards her, and Percy charged, slamming his blade into Jason. Thank the gods! Percy turned his sword, maybe on purpose, maybe accidentally, so the flat of it hit Jason's chest, but the impact was still enough to knock Jason off his mount. Blackjack cantered away as Tempest reared in confusion. The spirit horse charged into the sunflowers and dissipated into vapour. Percy struggled to turn his Pegasus around. "Percy," Piper yelled, "Jason's your friend. Drop your weapon." Percy's sword arm slipped and dipped. Piper might have been able to bring him under control, but unfortunately Jason got to his feet. Jason roared. A bolt of lightning arced out of the clear blue sky. It ricocheted off his gladius and blasted Percy off his horse. Blackjack whinnied and fled into the wheat fields. Jason charged at Percy, who was now on his back, his clothes smoking from the lightning blast. For a horrible moment, Piper couldn't find her voice. Gaia seemed to be whispering to her, "You must choose one. Why not let Jason kill him?" "No," she screamed. "Jason, stop!" He froze, his sword 6 inches from Percy's face. Jason turned, the gold light in his eyes flickering uncertainly. "I cannot stop. One must die." Something about that voice. It wasn't Gaia. It wasn't Jason. Whoever it was spoke haltingly, as if English was its second language. "Who are you?" Piper demanded. Jason's mouth twisted in a gruesome smile. "We are the Eidolons. We will live again." Eidolons? Piper's mind raced. She'd studied all sorts of monsters at Camp Half-Blood, but that term wasn't familiar. You're some sort of ghost?" "He must die." Jason turned his attention back to Percy, but Percy had recovered more than either of them realised. He swept out his leg and knocked Jason off his feet. Jason's head hit the tarmac with a nauseating conk. Percy rose. "Stop it!" Piper screamed again, but there was no charm speak in her voice. She was shouting in sheer desperation. Percy raised Riptide over Jason's chest. Panic closed up Piper's throat. She wanted to attack Percy with her dagger, but she knew that wouldn't help. Whatever was controlling him had all of Percy's skill. There was no way she could beat him in combat. She forced herself to focus. She poured all of her anger into her voice. "Eidolon, stop!" Percy froze. "Face me," Piper ordered. The son of the sea god turned. His eyes were gold instead of green, his face pale and cruel, but not at all like Percy's. "You have not chosen," he said, "so this one will die." "You're a spirit from the underworld," Piper guessed. "You're possessing Percy Jackson. Is that it?" Percy sneered. "I will live again in this body. The Earth Mother has promised. I will go where I please, control whom I wish." A wave of cold washed over Piper. Leo, that's what happened to Leo. He was being controlled by an Eidolon." The thing in Percy's form laughed without humour. "Too late you realise. You can trust no one." Jason still wasn't moving. Piper had no help, no way to protect him. Behind Percy, something rustled in the wheat. Piper saw the tip of a black wing, and Percy began to turn towards the sound. "Ignore it," she yelped. "Look at me." Percy obeyed. "You cannot stop me. I will kill Jason Grace." Behind him, Blackjack emerged from the wheat field, moving with surprising stealth for such a large animal. "You won't kill him," Piper ordered, but she wasn't looking at Percy. She locked eyes with the Pegasus, pouring all her power into her words and hoping Blackjack would understand. "You will knock him out." The charm speak washed over Percy. He shifted his weight indecisively. I will knock him out?" "Oh, sorry," Piper smiled. "I wasn't talking to you." Blackjack reared and brought his hoof down on Percy's head. Percy crumpled to the road next to Jason. "Oh, gods!" Piper ran to the boys. "Blackjack, you didn't kill him, did you?" The Pegasus snorted. Piper couldn't speak horse, but she thought he might have said, "Please, I know my own strength." Tempest was nowhere to be seen. The lightning steed had apparently returned to wherever storm spirits live on clear days. Piper checked on Jason. He was breathing steadily, but 2 knocks on the skull in 2 days couldn't have been good for him. Then she examined Percy's head. She didn't see any blood, but a large knot was forming where the horse had kicked him. "We have to get them both back to the ship," she told Blackjack. The Pegasus bobbed his head in agreement. He knelt on the ground so that Piper could drape Percy and Jason over his back. After a lot of hard work, unconscious boys are heavy. She got them reasonably secured, climbed onto Blackjack's back herself, and they took off for the ship. The others were a little surprised when Piper came back on a Pegasus with 2 unconscious demigods. While Frank and Hazel tended to Blackjack, Annabeth and Leo helped get Piper and the boys back to the sick bay. "At this rate, we're going to run out of ambrosia," Coach Hedge grumbled as he tended their wounds. "How come I never get invited on these violent trips?" Piper sat at Jason's side. She herself felt fine after a swig of nectar and some water, but she was still worried about the boys. "Leo," Piper said, "are we ready to sail?" "Yeah, but—" "Set course for Atlanta. I'll explain later." "But—" "Okay." He hurried off. Annabeth didn't argue with Piper either. She was too busy examining the horseshoe-shaped dent on the back of Percy's head. "What hit him?" she demanded. "Blackjack," Piper said. "What?" Piper tried to explain while Coach Hedge applied some healing paste to the boys' heads. She'd never been impressed with Hedge's nursing abilities before, but he must have done something right. Either that or the spirits that possessed the boys had also made them extra resilient. They both groaned and opened their eyes. Within a few minutes, Jason and Percy were sitting up in their berths and able to talk in complete sentences. Both had fuzzy memories of what had happened. When Piper described their duel on the highway, Jason winced. "Knocked out twice in 2 days," he muttered. "Some demigod." He glanced sheepishly at Percy. "Sorry, man. I didn't mean to blast you." Percy's shirt was peppered with burn holes. His hair was even more dishevelled than normal. Despite that, he managed a weak laugh. "Not the first time. Your big sister got me good once at camp." "Yeah, but I could have killed you." "Or I could have killed you," Percy said. Jason shrugged. "If there had been an ocean in Kansas, maybe." "I don't need an ocean." "Boys," Annabeth interrupted, "I'm sure you both would have been wonderful at killing each other, but right now you need some rest." "Food first," Percy said. "Please? And we really need to talk. Bacchus said some things that don't—" "Bacchus?" Annabeth raised her hand. "Okay, fine. We need to talk. Mess hall, 10 minutes. I'll tell the others. And please, Percy, change your clothes. You smell like you've been run over by an electric horse." Leo gave the helm to Coach Hedge again. After making the satyr promise, he would not steer them to the nearest military base for fun. They gathered around the dining table, and Piper explained what had happened at Topeka 32. Their conversation with Bacchus, the trap sprung by Gaia, the eidolons that had possessed the boys. "Of course," Hazel slapped the table, which startled Frank so much he dropped his burrito. "That's what happened to Leo too." "So it wasn't my fault," Leo exhaled. "I didn't start World War III, I just got possessed by an evil spirit." "That's a relief." "But the Romans don't know that," Annabeth said, "and why would they take our word for it?" "We could contact Raina," Jason suggested. "She would believe us." Hearing the way Jason said her name, like it was a lifeline to his past, made Piper's heart sink. Jason turned to her with a hopeful gleam in his eyes. "You could convince her, Pipes. I know you could." Piper felt like all the blood in her body was draining into her feet. Annabeth looked at her sympathetically, as if to say, "Boys are so clueless." Even Hazel winced. "I could try," she said half-heartedly. "But Octavian is the one we have to worry about. In my dagger blade, I saw him taking control of the Roman crowd. I'm not sure Raina can stop him." Jason's expression darkened. Piper didn't get any pleasure from bursting his bubble, but the other Romans, Hazel and Frank, nodded in agreement. "She's right," Frank said. "This afternoon when we were scouting, we saw eagles again. They were a long way off, but closing fast. Octavian is on the warpath." Hazel grimaced. This is exactly the sort of opportunity Octavian has always wanted. He'll try to seize power. If Raina objects, he'll say she's soft on the Greeks. As for those eagles, it's like they could smell us. "They can," Jason said. "Roman eagles can hunt demigods by their magical scent, even better than monsters can. This ship might conceal us somewhat, but not completely. Not from them." Leo drummed his fingers. Great. I should have installed a smoke screen that makes the ship smell like a giant chicken nugget. Remind me to invent that next time. Hazel frowned. What's a chicken nugget? Oh, man. Leo shook his head in amazement. That's right, you've missed the last 70 years. Well, my apprentice, a chicken nugget. Doesn't matter, Annabeth interrupted. The point is, we'll have a hard time explaining the truth to the Romans, even if they believe us. You're right. Jason leaned forward. We should just keep going. Once we're over the Atlantic, we'll be safe, at least from the Legion. He sounded so depressed, Piper didn't know whether to feel sorry for him or resentful. How can you be sure? She asked. Why wouldn't they follow us? He shook his head. You heard Rayner talking about the ancient lands. They're much too dangerous. Roman demigods have been forbidden to go there for generations. Even Octavian couldn't get around the rule. Frank swallowed a bite of burrito like it had turned to cardboard in his mouth. So, if we go there, we'll be outlaws as well as traitors, Jason confirmed. Any Roman demigod would have the right to kill us on sight. But I wouldn't worry about that. If we get across the Atlantic, they'll give up on chasing us. They'll assume that we'll die in the Mediterranean, the Mare Nostrum. Percy pointed his pizza slice at Jason. You, sir, are a ray of sunshine. Jason didn't argue. The other demigods stared at their plates, except for Percy, who continued to enjoy his pizza. Where he put all that food, Piper didn't know. The guy could eat like a satyr. So, let's plan ahead, Percy suggested, and make sure we don't die. Mr. D, Bacchus, do I have to call him Mr. B now? Anyway, he mentioned the twins in Ella's prophecy. 2 giants, Otis and, something that started with an F. Ephilatus, Jason said. Twin giants, like Piper saw in her blade. Annabeth ran her finger along the rim of her cup. I remember a story about twin giants. They tried to reach Mount Olympus by piling up a bunch of mountains. Frank nearly choked. Well, that's great. Giants who can use mountains like building blocks. And you say Bacchus killed these guys with a pine cone on a stick? Something like that, Percy said. I don't think we should count on his help this time. He wanted a tribute, and he made it pretty clear it would be a tribute we couldn't handle. Silence fell around the table. Piper could hear Coach Hedge above deck singing Blow the Man Down, except he didn't know the lyrics, so he mostly sang blah blah hum dum dum. Piper couldn't shake the feeling that Bacchus was meant to help them. The giant twins were in Rome. They were keeping something the demigods needed, something in that bronze jar. Whatever it was, she got the feeling it had the answer to sealing the doors of death, the key to endless death. She also felt sure they could never defeat the giants without Bacchus's help. And if they couldn't do that in 5 days, Rome would be destroyed and Hazel's brother, Nico, would die. On the other hand, if the vision of Bacchus offering her a silver goblet was false, maybe the other visions don't have to come true either, especially the one of her, Percy and Jason drowning. Maybe that was just symbolic. The blood of a female demigod, Gaia had said, and the blood of a male. Piper, my dear, choose which hero will die with you. She wants 2 of us, Piper murmured. Everyone turned to look at her. Piper hated being the centre of attention. Maybe that was strange for a child of Aphrodite, but she'd watched her dad, the movie star, deal with fame for years. She remembered when Aphrodite had claimed her at the bonfire in front of the entire camp, zapping her with a magic beauty queen makeover. That had been the most embarrassing moment of her life. Even here, with only 6 other demigods, Piper felt exposed. They're my friends, she told herself. It's okay. But she had a strange feeling, as if more than 6 sets of eyes were watching her. Today on the highway, she said, Gaia told me that she needed the blood of only 2 demigods. 1 female, 1 male. She asked me to choose which boy would die. Jason squeezed her hand. But neither of us died. You saved us. I know, it's just, why would she want that? Leo whistled softly. Guys, remember at the Wolf House? Our favourite ice princess, Keone? She talked about spilling Jason's blood, how it would taint the place for generations. Maybe demigod blood has some kind of power. Oh, Percy set down the 3rd pizza slice. He leaned back and stared at nothing, as if the horse kick to his head had now just registered. Percy? Annabeth gripped his arm. Oh, bad, he muttered. Bad, bad. He looked across the table at Frank and Hazel. You guys remember Polypotus? The giant who invaded Camp Jupiter, Hazel said. The anti-Poseidon you whacked in the head with a Terminus statue. Yes, I think I remember. I had a dream, Percy said. When we were flying to Alaska, Polypotus was talking to the Gorgons, and he said he wanted me taken prisoner, not killed. He said, I want that one chained at my feet so I can kill him when the time is ripe. His blood shall water the stones of Mount Olympus and wake Earth Mother. Piper wondered if the room's temperature controls were broken, because suddenly she couldn't stop shaking. It was the same way she'd felt on the highway outside Topeka. You think the giants would use our blood? The blood of two of us? I don't know, Percy said, but until we figure it out, I suggest we all try avoid getting captured. Jason grunted. That I agree with. But how do we figure it out? Hazel asked. The mark of Athena, the twins, Ella's prophecy. How does it all fit together? Annabeth pressed her hands against the edge of the table. Piper, you told Leo to set our course for Atlanta. Right, Piper said. Bacchus told us we should seek out, what's his name? Forces, Percy said. Annabeth looked surprised, like she wasn't used to her boyfriend having the answers. You know him? Percy shrugged. I didn't recognize the name at first. Then Bacchus mentioned salt water and it rang a bell. Forces is an old sea god from before my dad's time. Never met him, but supposedly he's the son of Gaia. I still don't understand what a sea god would be doing in Atlanta. Leo snorted. What's a wine god doing in Kansas? Gods are weird. Anyway, we should reach Atlanta by noon tomorrow, unless something else goes wrong. Don't even say that, Annabeth muttered. It's getting late. We should all get some sleep. Wait, Piper said. Once more, everyone looked at her. She was rapidly losing her courage, wondering if her instincts were wrong, but she forced herself to speak. There's one last thing, she said. The Eidolons, the possessing spirits. They're still here, in this room. Chapter 12. Piper. Piper couldn't explain how she knew. Stories of phantoms and tortured souls had always freaked her out. Her dad used to joke about Grandpa Tom's Cherokee legends from back on the res, but even at home in their big Malibu mansion, looking out over the Pacific, whenever her dad recounted the ghost stories for her, she could never get them out of her head. Cherokee spirits were always restless. They often lost their way to the land of the dead, or stayed behind with the living out of sheer stubbornness. Sometimes they didn't even realize they were dead. The more Piper learned about being a demigod, the more convinced she was that Cherokee legends and Greek myths weren't so different. These Eidolons acted a lot like the spirits of her dad's stories. Piper had a gut sense they were still present, simply because no one had told them to go away. When she was done explaining, the others looked at her uncomfortably. Up on deck, Hedge sang something that sounded like In the Navy, while Blackjack stomped his hooves, whinnying in protest. Finally, Hazel exhaled. Piper is right. How can you be sure? Annabeth asked. I've met Eidolons, Hazel said, in the underworld, when I was, dead. Piper had forgotten that Hazel was a second-timer. In her own way, Hazel too was a ghost reborn. So, Frank rubbed his hand across his buzz-cut hair, as if some ghosts might have invaded his scalp. You think these things are lurking on the ship, or possibly lurking inside some of us? Piper said. We don't know. Jason clenched his fist. If that's true, we have to take steps, Piper said. I think I can do this. Do what? Percy asked. Just listen, okay? Piper took a deep breath. Everybody listen. Piper met their eyes, one person at a time. Eidolons, she said, using her charm speak. Raise your hands. There was tense silence. Leo laughed nervously. Did you really think that was going to? His voice died. His face went slack. He raised his hand. Jason and Percy did the same. Their eyes had turned glassy and gold. Hazel caught her breath. Next to Leo, Frank scrambled out of his chair and put his back against the wall. Oh, gods! Annabeth looked at Piper imploringly. Can you cure them? Piper wanted to whimper and hide under the table, but she had to help Jason. She couldn't believe she'd held hands with... No, she refused to think about it. She focused on Leo because he was the least intimidating. Are there more of you on this ship? She asked. No, Leo said in a hollow voice. The Earth Mother sent 3. The strongest, the best. We will live again. Not here you won't, Piper growled. All 3 of you, listen carefully. Jason and Percy turned towards her. Those gold eyes were unnerving, but seeing all 3 boys like that fueled Piper's anger. You will leave those bodies, she commanded. No, Percy said. Leo let out a soft hiss. We must live. Frank fumbled for his bow. Mars almighty, that's creepy. Get out of here, spirits. Leave our friends alone. Leo turned towards him. You cannot command us, child of war. Your own life is fragile. Your soul could burn at any moment. Piper wasn't sure what that meant, but Frank staggered like he'd been punched in the gut. He drew an arrow, his hand shaking. I've faced down worse things than you. If you want to fight. Frank, don't. Hazel rose. Next to her, Jason drew his sword. Stop, Piper ordered, but her voice quavered. She was rapidly losing faith in her plan. She'd made the Eidolons appear, but what now? If she couldn't persuade them to leave, any bloodshed would be her fault. In the back of her mind, she could almost hear Gaia laughing. Listen to Piper. Hazel pointed at Jason's sword. The gold blade seemed to grow heavy in his hand. It clunked to the table, and Jason sank back into his chair. Percy growled in a very un-Percy-like way. Daughter of Pluto, you may control gems and metals. You do not control the dead. Annabeth reached towards him as if to restrain him, but Hazel waved her off. Listen, Eidolons, Hazel said sternly. You do not belong here. I may not command you, but Piper does. Obey her. She turned towards Piper, her expression clear. Try again. You can do this. Piper mustered all her courage. She looked straight at Jason, straight into the eyes of the thing that was controlling him. You will leave those bodies, Piper repeated, even more forcefully. Jason's face tightened, his forehead beaded with sweat. We will leave these bodies. You will vow on the river Styx never to return to this ship, Piper continued, and never to possess any member of this crew. Leo and Percy both hissed in protest. You will promise on the river Styx, Piper insisted. A moment of tension. She could feel their wills fight against hers. Then all three Eidolons spoke in unison. We promise on the river Styx. You are dead, Piper said. We are dead, they agreed. Now leave. All three boys slumped forward. Percy fell face first into his pizza. Percy! Annabeth grabbed him. Piper and Hazel caught Jason's arms as he slipped out of his chair. Leo wasn't so lucky. He fell towards Frank, who made no attempt to intercept him, and Leo hit the floor. Ow! He groaned. Are you all right? Hazel asked. Leo pulled himself up. He had a piece of spaghetti in the shape of a 3 stuck to his forehead. Did it work? It worked, Piper said, feeling pretty sure she was right. I don't think they'll be back. Jason blinked. Does that mean I can stop getting head injuries now? Piper laughed, exhaling all her nervousness. Come on, lightning boy. Let's get you some fresh air. Piper and Jason walked back and forth along the deck. Jason was still wobbly, so Piper encouraged him to wrap his arm around her for support. Leo stood at the helm, conferring with Festus through the intercom. He knew from experience to give Jason and Piper some space. Since the satellite TV was up again, Coach Hedge was in his cabin happily catching up on his mixed martial arts cage matches. Percy's Pegasus Blackjack had flown off somewhere. The other demigods were settling in for the night. The Argo 2 raced east, cruising several hundred feet above the ground. Below them, small towns passed by like lit-up islands in the dark sea of prairie. Piper remembered last winter, flying Festus the Dragon over the city of Quebec. She had never seen anything so beautiful, or felt so happy to have Jason's arms around her. But this was even better. The night was warm, the ship sailed along more smoothly than a dragon. Best of all, they were flying away from Camp Jupiter as fast as they possibly could. No matter how dangerous the ancient lands were, Piper couldn't wait to get there. She hoped Jason was right, that the Romans wouldn't follow them across the Atlantic. Jason stopped amidships and leaned against the rail. The moonlight turned his blonde hair silver. Thanks, Pipes, he said. You saved me again. He put his arm around her waist. She thought about the day they'd fallen into the Grand Canyon, the first time she'd learned that Jason could control the air. He'd held her so tightly she could feel his heartbeat. Then they'd stopped falling and floated in mid-air. Best boyfriend ever. She wanted to kiss him now, but something held her back. I don't know if Percy will trust me anymore, she said. Not after I let his horse knock him out. Jason laughed. Don't worry about that. Percy's a nice guy, but I get the feeling he needs a knock on the head every once in a while. You could have killed him. Jason's smile faded. That wasn't me. But I almost let you, Piper said. When Gaia said I had to choose, I hesitated and... She blinked, cursing herself for crying. Don't be so hard on yourself, Jason said. You saved us both. But if 2 of our crew really have to die, a boy and a girl, I don't accept that. We're going to stop Gaia. All 7 of us are going to come back alive, I promise you. Piper wished that he hadn't promised. The word only reminded her of the prophecy of 7, an oath to keep with her final breath. Please, she thought, wondering if her mum, the goddess of love, could hear her. Don't let it be Jason's final breath. If love means anything, don't take him away. As soon as she had made the wish, she felt guilty. How could she stand to see Annabeth in that kind of pain if Percy died? How could she live with herself if any of the 7 demigods died? Already each of them had endured so much. Even the 2 new Roman kids, Hazel and Frank, whom Piper barely knew, felt like kin. At Camp Jupiter, Percy had recounted their trip to Alaska, which sounded as harrowing as anything Piper had experienced. And from the way Hazel and Frank tried to help during their exorcism, she could tell they were brave, good people. The legend that Annabeth mentioned, she said, about the mark of Athena. Why didn't you want to talk about it? She was afraid Jason might shut her out, but he just lowered his head like he'd been expecting the question. Pipes, I don't know what's true and what's not. That legend, it could be really dangerous. For who? All of us, he said grimly. The story goes that the Romans stole something important from the Greeks, back in ancient times when the Romans conquered the Greek cities. Piper waited, but Jason seemed lost in thought. What did they steal? She asked. I don't know, he said. I'm not sure anyone in the Legion has ever known, but according to the story, this thing was taken away to Rome and hidden there. The children of Athena, Greek demigods, have hated us ever since. They've always stirred up their brethren against the Romans. Like I said, I don't know how much of that is true. But why not just tell Annabeth? Piper asked. She's not going to suddenly hate you. He seemed to have trouble focusing on her. I hope not, but the legend says that the children of Athena have been searching for this thing for millennia. Every generation, a few are chosen by the goddess to find it. Apparently, they're led to Rome by some sign, the mark of Athena. If Annabeth is one of those searchers, we should help her. Jason hesitated. Maybe. When we get closer to Rome, I'll tell her what little I know. Honest, but the story, at least the way I heard it, it claims that if the Greeks ever found what was stolen, they'd never forgive us. They'd destroy the Legion and Rome, once and for all, after what Nemesis told Leo about Rome being destroyed 5 days from now. Piper studied Jason's face. He was, without doubt, the bravest person she'd ever known, but she realized he was afraid. This legend, the idea that it might tear apart their group and level a city, absolutely terrified him. Piper wondered what could have been stolen from the Greeks that would be so important. She couldn't imagine anything that would make Annabeth suddenly turn vengeful. Then again, Piper couldn't imagine choosing one demigod's life over another, and today on the deserted road, just for a moment, Gaia had almost tempted her. I'm sorry, by the way, Jason said. Piper wiped the last tear from her face. Sorry for what? It was the Eidolon who attacked. Not about that. The little scar on Jason's upper lip seemed to glow white in the moonlight. She'd always loved that scar. The imperfection made his face much more interesting. I was stupid to ask you to contact Raina, he said. I wasn't thinking. Oh. Piper looked up at the clouds and wondered if her mother, Aphrodite, was somehow influencing him. His apology seemed too good to be true. But don't stop, she thought. Really, it's okay. It's just, I never felt that way towards Raina, Jason said. So I didn't think about it making you uncomfortable. You've got nothing to worry about, Pipes. I wanted to hate her, Piper admitted. I was so afraid you'd go back to Camp Jupiter. Jason looked surprised. That would never happen. Not unless you came with me, I promise. Piper held his hand. She managed to smile, but she was thinking, another promise, an oath to keep with a final breath. She tried to put those thoughts out of her mind. She knew she should just enjoy this quiet moment with Jason. But as she looked over the side of the ship, she couldn't help remembering how much the prairie at night looked like dark water, like the drowning room she'd seen in the blade of her knife.